Welcome. This is the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. If you've been with us for a while, you know that for about 2.5 years, this was done by the Revenue Game. And it was really about helping create the context that would allow organizations to maximize profit because they'd optimize people. Well, January this year, we became part of TTI. And TTI is really good at the optimizing people part. So over time, we're going to transition this podcast so that it's much more the combination of creating that great structure and then learning all those skills of how we optimize people. And so today, I'm really thrilled. My guest is Jodi Sherwood. And Jodi's an acknowledged writer, author, entrepreneur, business owner. I can tell you from working with her, she is a communications expert. She's a really good listener. And after she's listened, she is a storyteller. And she and I got to work on our book, Smart Rev. And I can tell you without her storytelling and her real depth of understanding of what we're doing, that would have never happened. So, Jodi, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I want to tell everybody how much I appreciated everything you did to, work together and create Smart Rev. And for me, it's a legacy piece. And if I get hit by that proverbial bus, so much of the things that I think are important are now documented and available to the world. So thank you for that.
Oh, it really was my pleasure, and it was an honor. It
Well,
was
so
so obviously it was so obviously your life's work and such a profound depth of information and philosophy and thought, and to be able to take that, hear that, absorb it all, and try to tell a story about it was really fun. It was really challenging.
well, give the audience some background on you and what you're doing. And I do want to talk more about the process we went through and what you do today, because I hope there's other people who will want to reach out to you and your team, because what you do is really extremely well done and you make it fun and easy. So give us some background.
Well, you said I was a storyteller, and I think that's the thread that goes through. I've been all over the map. I worked for corporate for 10 years. I worked in distance training and marketing. And then I went overseas for 15 years and lived in a number of different countries. I worked for an international aid organization, and I had an English language business, and we lived in Turkey the last 8 years, and then came back and transitioning transitioning from life overseas and all the different challenges and opportunities and good and bad, is when I met Mariana and came to work for her at Aloha Publishing as a ghostwriter. And I can't speak highly enough of her and that team, because I had a lot of skills and experience, but no idea of how to speak about them and how to, I didn't know what kind of a job I could get. I knew I was a writer and a storyteller, but how do you quantify that? So I've done a lot of things. I've written a number of novels, and I just had a children's book come out. I've always loved to write story and fiction, but I've ghost written a couple books, and yours was the first true business book, and it was really interesting timing because I was working on a side gig at the time that we were working together, and the principles were they just lit up my brain as an entrepreneur from an entrepreneurial family, having tried a number of businesses that went bust. It was perfect timing, and I just found the materials so engaging. So that's I've done a lot of things, but storytelling and writing is very much a through line.
So wow, I had no idea of some of that background. That's fascinating. I I just think of how brave in my world, how brave it is to go international and do those kinds of things over there. Uh, there aren't a lot of things that really scare me, but language is one I know I'm terrible at. And I can't conceive of living in a country that speaks a language, because I took 4 years of French and was worse at the end than I was in the beginning. And and I know that's a relatively easy language to learn. And so I'm very impressed. Uh, but as as you did all that now, what's your focus now?
Helping people tell their stories in a couple of different ways. I work with a couple different companies, and that's really my goal is to come alongside people. And if they're passionate about telling their story, then I love coming alongside and helping them. So helping you, writing with you was wonderful. It was a great experience. And then I have edited and I have helped along the way kind of package the whole thing. Publishing is such an interesting animal.
Yeah.
And so I think that the majority of what I do is partner with authors in a variety of contexts and help them get their work into the world.
Yeah, because I know in my own experience, I'm so used to talking to a particular very narrow niched group of people and, presenting it to them. And when you think about writing a book that could be anything from somebody in high school trying to figure out where they want to go to somebody who's been running companies for 20 years and making it enjoyable and interesting and valuable was a skill set nobody ever taught me. So, uh, yeah,
You're what you wanted to do to take, like we talked about earlier, to take this body of knowledge and pass it on. They're two different skill sets. and and so to be able to partner with you was really fun. But it's interesting to me, it's a unique cultural moment. I think being overseas for so long and coming back in, different things have changed, and I'm always sort of noticing that. But one of the things I've noticed is that more people are wanting to tell their story in book form, and it's from your side, like kind of a legacy. This is what I have learned in my life. I want to pass it on to the next, help the next generation. To to i i need a book to help with my business. A lot of people are setting themselves up as subject matter experts, and having a book is a wonderful business tool. To This is sort of my testimony. I want to say this is what happened to me, and this is
yeah,
this is passion of my life, and I want to get it out there. And writing, being able to write, being able to communicate that in the written word is a skill set that I don't think we all have, which is totally fine. I didn't have your skill set. I would never have come up with what you came up with, but that's the beauty of partnering together.
yeah. And it's interesting. We're really talking around one of the things I wanted to ask you about. Now that I know more of your background, I want to ask it even more. Um, in Smart Rev, we talk a lot about purpose. And, one of the things you did a wonderful job was capture the purpose that I had and, help to describe it. So I'd love to hear what your purpose is. And I think you just gave me the circle around it, but do you have a brief statement or a true north that you think about for your purpose?
I think it is. I'm not, I mean, I'm a terrible example of smart rev because I can't give it to you in a one sentence, but I do love helping people tell their stories and helping them make them better, helping them, encouraging them along, putting in whatever partnership I can. I think I think telling your story, telling what has happened to you and how you've changed and what you depend on, maybe where your faith lies. I mean, all of those things that are deep and profound, and they come from, I mean, some of them come from 20-year-olds that,
Yeah,
but
sure.
a lot of them come from people on the other end, the other side. I'm going to be 50 this year, and I'm looking back. What have I learned? Where have I put my trust? What has failed me? Where have I made mistakes? And it, I don't know if it's part personality or part age, but I think that the process of sort of trying to cull down what you've learned and pass it on in a relatable, well communicated, storytelling, funny, sad, poignant, all of those things, telling it to the next generation, whether it's your kids or your grandkids
Yeah.
or just younger people who are struggling. I think all of us look out and see people struggling, and we have all struggled. So to be able to help them distill what they've learned and their knowledge, and what works and what really doesn't. And we all have faith in something. And where
Yes.
what things that have you had faith in that have totally destroyed your life? I mean, so I think it's a whole, I'm terrible about getting it into a one sentence thing, but it's very much a heartbeat for me, is helping people get to that point and transmitting it.
Well, if you got it to one sentence, it'd be a short story.
Would be.
A couple of things you said in that I'd love to ask you more about, because it's interesting. Um, when I deal with organizations and they're trying to figure out how to um, establish trust with their employees, with their partners, with their customers, in their communities, um, that's a huge struggle today, because often the people we want to create trust with are 1,000 miles away, or 5,000 miles away, or a totally different time zone, or any of those kinds of things. And as I was listening to you, and you used trust as one of the things, when you think about what you do, are you conscious that you're helping build trust between the person whose story you're telling and the one who's reading it?
That's really an interesting question. And no, I had not ever considered that connection. I think what I consider is like the trust between you and I.
Yep.
That's the trust level that I think of. Um, I suppose when I'm partnering with an author, I'm wanting them to be honest and transparent, which are things that I think build trust, but I hadn't really thought of it from that lens. That's really interesting.
Because for both sides, both the reader and the writer, I mean, we've talked about this before. I do sometimes 2 books a week, so I'm a big book person. Uh, one of the first things I want to know is, do I trust the writer? And so, because if I'm listening or reading and I don't trust them, then all the rest of the material has a completely different impact on me than if I start out and I'm trusting what they're telling me.
Mhm.
Uh, I just approach the whole thing differently. And it literally, I never thought of this before, but it literally changes my life, because when I'm reading a book from somebody I trust, I'm taking that in and it's never getting out. I mean, whatever I've learned, I'm going to apply it. And I read all kinds of stuff. Uh, Not very much pure fiction, but lots of other kinds of things. And that trust, and I hope that's one of the things we accomplished in Smart Rev, was people can like it or dislike it, but I hope they trust it's the best I've got, or the best we've got.
Yeah, and that you have put years into it. I think that's a big part of trust, is telling people enough of who you are or where you're coming from, what your experience is, so that they can trust that you know what you're talking about. Whereas we're just inundated with social media and a culture of people who stand up as experts and they don't have a leg to stand on. So I think with a book, you get a better chance of, if somebody's picked up your book, they're giving you a 5, 10, 15 minute chance.
Yep.
And if you start off, with a bang and with a great story, but enough depth that they can see who you are, where you're coming from, and why you have the credibility to say these things. I've been working with another author, taking her through a story, and she's telling a story that happened, some difficult things that happened 10 years ago. And I was telling her she had some humor in the first couple of chapters, and I said, "You haven't earned that. You need to tell your story and earn the ability to joke with your reader, because this is really serious and they don't know if they trust you yet."
Yes.
So it's true. I think we have such an epidemic of distrust in institutions and in our neighbor down the street,
Yeah.
that taking the it's an honor, really, if someone will pick up your writing and give you 10 minutes to explain yourself rather than giving you a 15-second soundbite to explain yourself. They're giving you a great opportunity, and we need to honor that.
Yeah, and I both as the now author, but for years as the reader, and whether it's reading or it's watching the evening news or whatever it is, there's so few sources that I have any trust in at all. And if I have any trust, it's that I don't believe them. I trust, I don't believe them.
Yeah,
And,
right.
and so I look for where's there somebody that even if I disagree, well, I'm fine with disagreeing because I learned something I learned something about myself, and I learned something about their position. And often I have books that I didn't like this book, but I can't stop thinking about it. And
Mhm.
I'm thinking about it sometimes for years because they really had something in there I needed. And I
Yeah,
trusted they meant it.
yeah.
So
And it can just get through the bone and the marrow and zap you right in the soul sometimes.
yeah, yeah. And so as I think about what you do, it's that opportunity. And I know a number of people who've written books that I don't find much soul in them. They're really writing them so they can have a book to pass out at a conference or someplace. And I mean, that's fine. I understand why people do that, but I think that's different than what you do.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, half of our books at Aloha are for speakers to pass out. That's a wonderful market, but I think you can do it as a business card, or you can do it as like really a soulful, as something of depth. You can take more of a story to it and make it more profound, and for
Well, and
sure,
as you
for sure, there's a different way to do it.
and it was interesting when I gave an early draft of Smart Rev to my daughter, who's a fiction writer. She just got through the first two or three chapters, and she said, "That's your voice." And so, to me, that made the book more trustworthy. It doesn't make it more accurate. It just makes it that's what I would really say or believe or feel. And
For
that
sure.
was that was a great piece of feedback from her.
For sure. Someone who knows you very well.
Yeah. So as we went through the Smart Rev work, and you deal with other people, and you were starting a business and working on a business you'd had, were there one or two things that you took away or surprised you, or really hit home from doing the book?
Oh, yes, for sure. I found every part of it interesting and applicable. I think that for me, the position that I was in, it was really helpful to think through purpose and to think about purpose when you're starting the business. And it was really helpful to think about when we were putting our offerings together. I mean, the whole thing, but like things that drift up to mind when we were putting our offerings together. I used the spreadsheet that we came up with in the book. Like, this offer is more profitable than this offer, we need to lean into this one, and we have. And the true north in terms of helping make decisions when you are awash in decisions that need to be made, having a true north speeds up the process, and we all are suffering from decision fatigue. And so it helps with that as well. It helps with keeping the team going in the same direction. It makes the no, like I believe the exact sentences in the book. It makes the no's easier. And quick no's are so helpful rather than having to have a 2-hour discussion about whether this is the business we want or not. The pricing, the thought leadership, we talked about that a lot, whether you're a thought leader or whether you're a commodities,
Yep.
side. And and what are the and they're both great, but what are the benefits of each? And if you're going to be a thought leader, that has implications. You see, I used the whole thing. It was incredibly helpful, and I could see how it was helpful for me, as a startup, and I could see how it would be helpful from my years in corporate. It would have been so helpful if we would have been moving in the same direction instead of, the silos really spoke to me from previous battlefields in corporate. It
Well,
was it was just extremely, extremely helpful.
I'm thrilled to hear your feedback as an entrepreneur, because people ask me all the time, well, does Smart Rev apply to entrepreneurs? And in some ways, more there than any other place, because you're making all new decisions. And the better those new decisions, the better the rest of eternity is for you.
For sure. And looking at them and looking back, like I said, I've had a number of businesses that have not gone anywhere. And being able to kind of look back on them through the Smart Rev lens and see, oh, I was trying to sell a commodity in a thought leadership space. I mean, there's when you have disconnect, you can see the disconnect, and it helps you adjust your behavior going forward.
Yeah, well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's good feedback for me, because it's something I believe is true, but I don't often get to talk to people who've been through Smart Rev and they're starting their company at the same time.
Yeah.
So, given all that we've talked about, where do you see yourself going next? I mean, what's you've got your purpose, and I love your purpose, and I think it is so, in this, as you said, in this world where I really don't trust a lot of people, I see so many people who are, um, you know, whether it's egotistical or selfish or whatever, that understanding who they are is really, really important to me. So how do you see the next chapter of what you're going to be doing?
Well, I think that one thing that I'm currently struggling with and leading into the future is how to put together a team with the same values, how to expand, and having the purpose and hiring on those core values. All of those things are so helpful. But I don't want to hire anybody without that. I mean, like I have taken those principles so much to heart that I don't want to just hire anybody. I don't even want to hire somebody off of like Upwork or Fiverr or something like that, because I want to know who they are. I
Yeah,
want to know where they're coming from, and if we share the same values, if we share the same enthusiasm to partner. Um, so figuring out how to scale and how to maintain the core of who we are, I think is really important. I think uh, I mean, it's a critical part of expanding. And then how to give that level of partnership to more people, because it's something that's a core value to me, and part of my purpose is this level of partnership and friendship. And you
yeah,
can't do that just with 1,000 people. So it's sort of countercultural, because everything is going toward more efficiency and conglomerate and bigger companies at the top, and I prefer this kind of interaction. I mean, even though, yes, we're in different states and we have the miles between us, it's a one-on-one
yeah.
interaction, and we have a relationship, and it's not just slotting you into a box. So I think the future is figuring out how to bridge and help and partner with more people and more clients, but maintain who we are. I think I've just seen that. I've seen that lost, not bridged, and I'd kind of like to figure out how to bridge it.
Now, that's a great transition because the next thing I want to ask you about is, who should be your next client and how should they prepare to work with you and what should their expectations be?
Boy, can I flip that back around first?
Sure.
I wanted to ask you, it's very similarly, like, how did it feel to bring your life's work in and just trust, these random couple of ladies, and I mean the trust factor, and you cared about it so much and you just handed it over.
Well, great question. Thank you for asking. First, you are really good as a team and individually. You're really good at engaging, in this case, me, with thoughtful, intentional, purposeful questions. I'm a big believer that questions matter. And then amazingly, you listened after you asked the question. And that just dropped any defense right away. Because when people ask purposeful, meaningful questions, I want to honor the fact they did it. I mean, that's just inside me. I mean, it could be a stranger asking me. If they ask a really purposeful, thoughtful question, I'm happy to answer. I mean, to me, that starts a relationship, that starts a trust. And so you guys were really good at it. And you were also really good at it in an intentional, systemic way. I mean, occasionally we would just kind of wander, but most of the time there was intent to it that was connected to your process, which I respected because I had no process. When I tried to write a book, I just was throwing stuff out there, and not only didn't I know how to put it together in an organized way, once I had it on paper, I didn't know what to do with it. And so I was, I didn't know for sure what our outcome was going to be, but I had a much higher probability of a really cool outcome because the way you did it. And then you have great empathy. And so I'm a believer in body language. And you can tell when somebody has empathy versus they're just going through a script. And so that combination of intentional, meaningful, purposeful, good questions, and then the empathy to deal with what comes next. Because whatever your intentional questions are, answers can get you all over the place. And so that was what made the trust factor very easy and very fast and very high. Because had none of that happened, it would have been a completely different scenario.
Well, I love hearing that. I had that had been a question that I had wanted to ask you for a while because it struck me about halfway through the process how much trust you had put in us and how much of, I mean, when it is your life's work.
Yeah.
So coming back to your question, I think you are our ideal client, in a lot of ways. You had a passion project of some kind, you had a passion project that was mostly formed. You needed the translation into the written word. And having learned Spanish and having learned Turkish and having lived in overseas, I think it is some experience that I have that I'm able to translate and I can write with the written word. I'm good at communicating in that way. So I took your videos and your written words, PowerPoints,
Yeah.
the idea, and I took all of the idea in and I, mashed it around and asked you 100
Yeah.
questions and and then I translated it.
Yep.
And I think that the key factor to an ideal client is the passion and the mostly formed idea, whatever that idea is, that you want to get out, and you recognize you cannot do the translating because
Yeah.
you have to trust your translator enough to take it and trust the outcome.
Yep.
Because if it's not your native language, you'll probably be able to understand it. I mean, that's where the metaphor breaks down. You'll be able to read it and understand it, but when you're using a translator, you don't necessarily know how it's going to come out.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really interesting because I hadn't thought of it as a translation, but that's substantially what it is. It's really translating whether it's style or sequence or whatever, and turning it from my. I tend to get into a lot of fairly structured by industry or by who I'm talking to environments. And that's not a story. That's, engineers talking to engineers kind of thing. And I hadn't thought of it as a translation.
I
So,
mean, you're speaking, like we talked about that in the book. You speak the language of your audience.
yeah,
I've seen you do it. I mean, you're marvelous at verbal communication. You're just marvelous. And how you can take a question and sit for a minute and then just put out a minute of magnificent communication. So you're really good at speaking verbally to the audience that you're listening to. And that's just not the same thing.
no, not at all. I mean, yeah, because I'm a translator in that situation. I'm taking a question that in the TTI world that, you're a high D and somebody else is a low S, and I'm trying to translate between those two things. And yeah, I had never thought of it quite that way, but it doesn't get much of me in it that way. And that's part of my goal, is to have as little of me in that conversation as possible. So interesting. So I've had a lot of people ask me about the experience. So talk as if our audience has a whole bunch of potential people who have stories and want to get them out. Uh, how should they prepare? What should their expectations be? What's a good decision to want to do this versus wait a little while until you get something else in place?
Great question. Because we do have all kinds of people who are wanting to tell their story, as we said earlier. Um, I think that you would need to start with your purpose. Why are you doing this? And that to me is a great indicator of which direction you should go, because there are, I tell people all the time, it's a great time to be a writer. It's a great time to tell your story. There's so much opportunity. There's so many open doors. It used to be traditional publishing, and that was it. And they were the gatekeeper, and they had all the knowledge and all the experience, and the only ways to get to an audience was through them.
Yeah,
And now it's wide open. So the problem is not in getting your book done. The problem is in marketing, but that's a whole different that's a whole different discussion. But I would say, why do you want to do it? Because the next factor is, who do you want to partner with? And who do you want to partner with is where you get into, how much is it going to cost? How much are you going to need to invest to get it done? And there's a wide variety between traditional and completely doing it all on your own. And there are independent publishers, hybrid publishers, all in the middle, who you can partner with, or you can parcel it out and hire contractors to do different bits of it. But I would say, look at your purpose, and then try to find a partner who meets you where you are and can walk you forward. And it doesn't matter where you are, as long as your purpose is, I want to get this out. And in getting this out, I want it to be more than like a PDF to give to
Yeah.
my children. Because if you want a PDF for your children, that's awesome. It's not partnering with an independent publisher as your step forward, but you know, there are other steps you could take. But if your purpose is to get it out there and have it available to the world, then you need to figure out where you're at and find a partner who can meet you there and help you forward.
You know, that's really interesting. Just the recognition that an independent publisher is a real option. Because I mean, for years I've looked at how to approach this. And I tend to get, you know, when I read whatever there's out there, oh, you can do Amazon, do it all yourself. And okay, I already am sure that's not going to work for me. And then there's some people will help you do Amazon and they'll do a webinar with you. And, you know, and then of course there's the traditional. And I actually used a proof for a couple of publishers. So at least I had contacts, but I also was pretty sure they weren't going to do it. And so I wasn't conscious of the independent publisher and the fact that you can write a scope of work in a sense with an independent publisher.
Absolutely. What you want done, what they're going to do, what you're going to do, and the scope can be as small or as wide as you want. It's really fun. Like if you get to the point where you want to put it out there and you don't want to do it all yourself, there like you have options and you have a wide variety of options. I always tell people like don't sign with the first person you find because there are a lot of companies who are taking advantage, and there are a lot of companies who are doing the, kind of the just rubber
Oh
stamping
yeah.
factory version. And then there are people who like Mariana and Heather and I, who you'll meet face to face and we want to partner with you and you get and there are more like us, but there are a lot of independents out there who are very much just kind of factories.
Yeah, the thing I was so impressed by you and your team was you are a very um practice business. You have best practices and you know things that will add value and you know things that are just a waste of energy. But with all the empathy and all the other pieces along with it, which I found marvelous because some of the people I touched earlier, it was, you know, they were some kind of factory scenario and you know, I knew that that didn't fit. I needed a Jodi to help me, or I was never going to get there. So, okay, we could do this conversation all day, but I want to ask you a couple of questions before we finish. One is, you know, with all the people that you've had a chance to work with, um, what advice do you have for people who, and I'm going to ask it very specifically, who want to tell their story and create trust with the reader? Because I think that's a missing, not that you miss it doing it, but I think in general, we don't think about that as part of the purpose. And I think part of the purpose should be, you don't have to like it or agree, but I'd like to have you trust the fact I meant it. You know, what advice do you have for people?
I think it would be the same advice I have coming back into our culture after being away so long. And that is that we are experiencing a season of division and arguing and fighting and lobbing arrows at each other in our different whatever ideological box we're living in.
Yep,
We lob arrows over here and they're real people.
yep,
And you'd probably like them in certain scenarios, you just happen to know that they have this identifier on them and you don't like that identifier. And I think we as a society need to get to know people better, and we need to walk across the street and find out what we have in common, because we do have a lot in common. And I think that's my way around to your question is I think we need to do that when we're telling our stories too. Don't start with, I'm a whatever political party and I believe in blah blah platform and I think you're a big blah, I mean, it's like we give our credentials, our ideological credentials, like we used to give I'm a PhD, I'm a lawyer,
Yeah.
I'm a doctor, I'm a whatever. And it doesn't, it does not have the same impact as credibility of, a PhD or whatever. What it does is it instantly divides. But if you tell your story, if you don't have to, it doesn't have to be like a expose on your life, but you do need to make yourself more than just a paper cutout to your reader. You need to give them enough to know where you're coming from, and you need to be honest about mistakes. I think that's a big part of building trust and credibility. I completely messed up when
Yeah.
when you're trying to speak from authority. I think we used to like it when people were on a pedestal. We used to like to hear advice from them, and we didn't want to know anything about their personal life because, of course, that instantly knocks them
Yeah.
down.
They're
But now,
human.
yeah, now I think we want to sit in the public square and have a conversation. And maybe you and I don't agree on some things, but we haven't talked about that. Like, we've known each other for a year now, and we're not instantly going to, well, where do we disagree? We're talking about something that now we both love. You have brought me into your love for Smart Rev, and that was very generous. And any writer can bring their reader into a love for
Yeah.
whatever they're passionate about. If you just like, we don't have to say what we believe about certain things right off the bat and just inflame a situation right off the bat. Like, it's okay that we're not the same person. We're different. Diversity is awesome. So I think I way over answered that, but I think basically you just have to be honest with who you are, where you're coming from, and that creates a level of trust in your reader.
Well, I don't think you way over answered. As a matter of fact, I uh, often ask this question at the end, and I ask specifically, if you're talking to a senior executive or you're talking to a recent graduate, but your answer was so perfect for both. Uh, I assume that you agree with that, but because I was imagining as you were talking, if I'm a senior executive, how powerful this was, and if I were just starting into the world, how meaningful that advice is, to get myself into a good place instead of get myself into a corner that I wish I wasn't in.
Right. And we're like, when you're desperate, you make decisions out of desperation. And then you paint yourself into a corner. And you're right. It works for both sides. Like, you can avoid some things and you can adjust and help the people down the line.
Yeah, yeah. Well, wonderful. Last question. Is there any final advice you'd like to pass on to any of us, or uh, just something you'd like to leave with us?
I think everybody should tell their story. I don't know, I think it's such a healthy, joyful, encouraging thing. Not everybody should do something with it. Sometimes you just need to write it out, but the process of, and you don't have to be 50 or 70 or whatever at the end of your career. The
Yeah,
process of looking back either at your life or at a season of your life and looking at the things that you're grateful for that you would not have thought you would have been grateful for in the middle of it, and looking at the things that you wish you'd done better, but it's okay, you didn't know any better, and like, forgive yourself. And it's just, there's something so beautiful about writing your story. And maybe you're not a writer, that's totally fine. It's the process
yeah,
of of thinking through what just happened and what are the things I can glean and what are the things I can change, and did I hurt somebody that I could ask forgiveness of? I mean, ask forgiveness of. You know, there's things that I think our lives can weigh on us, but if we pull an experience off, it doesn't have to. Like you can take that weight off and you can help somebody else with it, whether it's, you know, whether you pass that PDF to your child or to your niece or to your coworker. Our stories matter. They really do. And to be able to tell them we're not as much an oral society anymore, but we can write them. And such a healing, good, encouraging process.
Wow, that's wonderful, Jodi. I want to thank you so much for being the guest today on the podcast. And for those of you who watched, I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did or listened. And I will cannot recommend highly enough Jodi Sherwood and the Aloha Group. If you're thinking about a book, absolutely check with them. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you the next time.